You're listening to the Neighborhood Bulldog, where the porch light's always on and the maroon runs deep. I'm Scott Neighbors, and this is your home for real Mississippi State sports talk. Around here, we don't chase headlines. We break down the wins, the losses, the culture, and what it really means to be a Bulldog. If it matters in Starkville, it matters here. So pull up a chair, grab a drink, and welcome to the neighborhood. Hail State. Welcome back to the neighborhood. This is the Neighborhood Bulldog with your host, Scott Neighbors. Here, as we get ready for a huge weekend series, a great opportunity for Mississippi State baseball to get back on the right side of things as far as their conference record goes. We will recap the midweek game and give you a great in-depth preview for the upcoming weekend starting right now. On Tuesday night at Dudy Noble Field, Mississippi State beats the University of Alabama Birmingham Blazers in a 5-3 win. It was a tough, gritty game, but the Dogs were able to pull it out. UAB is not a bad team at all. They are a very tough midweek team. After that loss, that puts their overall record at 22-11. And they looked like a solid ball club. They played well, and they made it difficult for State. But ultimately, State got things going in the first inning on an Ace Reese 2-run home run to right field. UAB struck back with a home run of their own, a solo shot in the third inning. And then in the bottom of the third, freshman superstar Jacob Parker gets a 2-run home run for himself to right center. At that point, it's bottom of the third. We're up 4-1. And then a UAB double and a sac fly later makes it 4-3 Mississippi State in the fifth inning. And then Garrick Fry in the seventh comes through with an RBI single to center field where it would stay 5-3 for the remainder of the game. Played all 9 innings. Like I said, a tough, gritty game. Big win for the Bulldogs there, who continue to own the midweek games. Mississippi State remains the only team in the SEC that has not had just a horrific midweek loss. So kudos to the Bulldogs for taking care of business there. Offensively for State, we had Garrick Fry go 2 for 3 with a run and an RBI. Ace Reese went 2 for 4 with 1 run and 2 RBIs. And then Vitas Valencius goes 2 for 4. He's coming along lately and swinging a hot bat right now after a home run that he hit the other day. Looking really good at the plate for him. Chris Billingsley got the start on the mound for Mississippi State in this one. Needed to get him some confidence. We've got to be able to have him come in the back end of some games or in the mid part of some games if we're going to have a long season. And he gets to start going 3.2 innings, 2 hits, 2 runs, no walks, and 2 Ks. So, he's had some control issues this season, but his last 2 outings have looked really, really solid. After he came in, we had Jack Gleason, Miller, Pitzer, Burns, Webb, and Ben Davis. They all shared the rest of the game, going about an inning apiece. That shores up the midweek. We'll get into what a wild Tuesday it was around the league here in a little bit. But Mississippi State takes care of business after a devastating weekend. Entering this upcoming weekend, Mississippi State is going to face the Tennessee Volunteers. Now, Mississippi State enters this weekend with a 26-7 overall record and a 7-5 conference record after an embarrassing sweep by the Georgia Bulldogs last weekend. This weekend serves as an enormous opportunity for Mississippi State to get right, continue to get back protecting Dudy Noble Field, and hopefully wipe that sweep off of our record. If Mississippi State could somehow pull off a sweep this weekend, then last weekend becomes largely unimportant. So, big opportunity here for the Bulldogs. The Tennessee Volunteers come into this weekend with a 21-12 overall record and just 4-8 SEC record. They've had series losses to Kent State, Georgia. They were swept by Vandy, and most recently they lose 2 of 3 to LSU. Mixed in there, they've got some losses to Kent State, Wright State, and a bad Missouri team. So Tennessee has had what is largely considered by their fan base a very disappointing season. And to make things worse, if you're a Tennessee fan, you're coming to Duty Noble Field, and right now this season, Tennessee is just 1-5 on the road. So coming into a hostile environment, it's going to be packed. It's a big weekend. Mississippi State's looking for some revenge after all the smack that happened under Tony Vitello in this series. Just some Bush League baseball played, and that was Tennessee's thing. You know, Tennessee was the villain in college baseball, and that's the attitude Tony Vitello instilled in his team. But Tony Vitello's not there anymore. He's not there. Overall, in this series, Mississippi State is 60-38 all time versus the Tennessee Volunteers in baseball. And Tennessee is just 15-37 in this series in away games. So not a whole lot of success for Tennessee when it comes to playing at Duty Noble Field outside of anyone named Tony Vitello. In the last 10 matchups, Tennessee is 9-1 versus Mississippi State, and that includes a sweep the very last time they played in Starkville, which was in 2022. Now, that's the Tony Vitello effect, and as I mentioned, he's not here anymore. The program of the fur daddy coats, or the fur coats, the big daddy hats, just the swag, the attitude, the coolness that Tennessee played with. I mean, every time they stepped on the field under Vitello, they looked and acted like they could not be beat. And it looked like they believed that to their core. Well, that attitude is pretty much gone from this baseball program. It's hard to say there's been another program with this much of a culture shift or a culture fall off than the Tennessee Volunteers when Tony Vitello left. While head coach Josh Elander, he was a big part of the recruiting classes at Tennessee, he is a much different person than Tony Vitello. His attitude is much more even keel. He's much more calm in the dugout. I certainly think the players fed off of Tony Vitello much more than they feed off of Josh Elander, and I think you see it in the performance. Now Tennessee's a fan base that, likes to think they invented baseball a few years ago. They forget some of the great rivalries of the 90s. Mississippi State and Tennessee had a great baseball rivalry in the 90s, but largely Tennessee cares about two things, basketball and football. And it was good to see Tony Vitello inject the baseball program into the same spotlight at a big school like Tennessee, where they can get the big recruits. They can win championships, and they did that under him. But it should not fall off this fast just because he left. I really don't know the explanation for it other than what is Josh Elander doing. But from a rotation standpoint, Mississippi State is likely going to see Landon Mack on Friday night. Landon Mack comes into Friday with a 3.48 ERA, 44 innings, 17-58 walk to strikeout ratio. And so far this season, opponents are hitting 260 off of the Friday night starter there. On Saturday, it's looking likely that we will face Tegan Coons, and he has a 3.83 ERA with 42 innings pitched and an 18-52 walk to strikeout ratio, while opponents are hitting just 200 off of him. On that third game for Sunday, you typically see the starter kind of be at a lower level for most teams. Well, that is not the case for Tennessee. Evan Blanco, their Sunday starter, comes in with a 3.89 ERA, 39 innings, and just an 8 walk to 47 strikeout ratio with opponents batting 247 off of him. So a extremely solid pitching rotation for the Tennessee Volunteers. And after a horrible weekend at the plate versus Georgia, Mississippi State's hitters are going to have to get their minds right and really going to have to lock in for this weekend in each game, because after what Georgia did to Mississippi State in the public eye like that, the book is out on State's offense. We have a very difficult time with off-speed pitches. Changeups, sliders, curveballs, especially any spin, we have a very difficult time with that. And we've got to get right. You know, do you sit on the spin because you know that's what you're going to get, or do you hunt the one or two fastballs that you may see as a hitter? I fully expect Tennessee's pitching staff to load up on breaking balls the entire weekend, just based off what Georgia did. I mean, that's what they did the entire weekend to Mississippi State, and we could not stop them. So Mississippi State's hitters are going to have their work cut out for them. They're going to have to focus, and they're going to have a very solid plan if we don't want to get embarrassed this weekend again. Offensively for Tennessee, you have Garrett Wright leading the way in the leadoff spot. He's batting 321 with 10 RBIs and 3 home runs, slugging 538, and he has 14 strikeouts to 5 walks as a hitter. So really solid leadoff hitter there for Tennessee. And then you've got Blake Grimmer in the cleanup spot, who's batting 303 with 7 home runs and 16 RBI. But the best player, in my opinion, by far on this Tennessee team has to be Brian O'Connor's old friend, Henry Ford, who I think most people expected that he would follow Brian O'Connor to Mississippi State. Although I understand why he didn't, with Mississippi State having Ace Reese returning, holding down that third base spot. Henry Ford opts for Tennessee, and it is paying off for him. Batting in the 3 hole for the Volunteers, currently batting 301 on the season with 10 home runs and 31 RBIs. He strikes out 23 times to 13 walks. So there is some pop in this lineup for Tennessee. And State's pitchers are going to have to keep the ball down. And, you know, we saw this weekend that the wind was absolutely a factor in a home run hitting team like Georgia. Now, Tennessee would not be considered a big home run hitting team this season. However, there is some pop. And if the ball gets up and in the wind, it's going to hurt. Tennessee's batters strike out a good bit, and we'll get into that in just a second. But you see those high strikeout to walk ratios from an offensive standpoint. That's never what you want to see if you're a hitting coach. Now, as far as some SEC rankings go, Tennessee is hitting 227 as a team, which is good for 12th out of 16th in the SEC. So one of the worst hitting teams in the SEC from an average standpoint overall. They also strike out. They've struck out 130 times as an offense, which also puts them 12th in the SEC in that ranking. For comparison's sake, Mississippi State is batting 277 in league play. These are SEC-only stats, by the way. State's batting 277 in league play, which puts them at third in the SEC, and they have struck out enough to be fourth in the SEC with just 108 as a team. So there's your comparison there. Mississippi State is in that top three, top four tier, while Tennessee is pushing around that 12 to 16th mark in most offensive categories. Now, switching over to defense on the pitcher's mound, you might be surprised to find out that Mississippi State's pitching staff actually leads the SEC with 144 strikeouts. Not only do they have 144 strikeouts, 48 of those strikeouts are strikeouts looking. Tennessee comes in at seventh in the league with 123. Another thing to note is that Tennessee's pitching staff currently gives up the second most home runs out of all the SEC teams. So, a huge opportunity for Mississippi State to get back in the saddle in terms of SEC standings. We entered last weekend against Georgia tied for first with Georgia and Texas. Texas goes on the road and wins 2 out of 3 at South Carolina. Georgia comes on the road to Mississippi State and wins all 3 games. So that puts Georgia in sole possession of first place in the SEC entering this upcoming weekend, and Mississippi State dropped to tied for fourth in the league with 3 other teams. So a lot of movement, a lot of shuffling right there in the middle or the top 5 of the league. And Mississippi State has a chance to solidify itself, hopefully getting back into what could be the top 3 in the league. Now, with a 7-5 record in conference play, um, getting the sweep versus Vandy and on the road at Ole Miss was huge. If you had not swept both of those series and you end up just winning 2 out of 3 of those series, you would end up being 5-5 in the SEC right now. And I don't think many people on the Bulldog side of things would be very happy with a 500 record in the SEC. Brian O'Connor came into this season with massive, massive expectations, a ton of pressure to perform, and has largely done just that. Um, we will see what improvements and corrections were made after last weekend. But ultimately, thank goodness, Mississippi State has the cushion of those 2 sweeps on their back where you do have a few games to play with. Ultimately, in my opinion, if we want to stay in the SEC race, we want to stay in the national seed discussion, this series right here is a must win. You at least have to win the series. It would be even better to go ahead and sweep this series and largely make last weekend mean very, very little in the grand scheme of things as we move down the road. Now, looking ahead, we've got this weekend, and then we go on the road to South Carolina. South Carolina looks like a completely different team under Monty Lee after they fired Paul Maneri. We just saw South Carolina, who really should have won the series against Arkansas. Maybe if they had fired Maneri 1 game earlier, they could have. But, blew out Texas last weekend in one of the games and ultimately lost 2 out of 3 there. But again, they look completely different. That's going to be a tough road series. So I would love for Mississippi State to get back to playing Bulldog baseball that we've seen so far this year. And in the grand scheme of things, nobody likes to get swept. Of course, nobody likes to get swept. However, when you look at Mississippi State, State's record versus top 5, top 10 teams is not very good. But when you look at the losses, they are not getting blown out of these games. They are in every game that they've played. We had a 1-run loss to UCLA. We had a 1-run loss on the schedule on the road in a big midweek game versus a top 10 Southern Miss. And, you have a 1-run loss to Arkansas. Really, the only game that has escaped Mississippi State was this 7-3 loss at Arkansas. That one really got away from us there. But you look at the losses to Georgia. Yes, the Friday night or the Thursday night game, we were down 10-2, but we end up fighting back that we know this offense is never out of a game until the last out has been made. We end up making that 10-9, and we were threatening in the ninth inning. Friday, you lose 3-1, and then Saturday, you lose 8-5, but that was because of a 3-run home run that was hit in the 10th inning. So the wins may not be there versus some of these top teams, but the grit, the competitiveness, that is there. Because how many of these games would we have lost getting run ruled last year under Lamonas or the year before? I would venture to say several. So while we're not winning them, we are in these games, and they're not just running away from us. So a great opportunity this weekend versus a team that is not nearly on the same tier as the Georgia Bulldogs. And so you would expect Mississippi State to honestly sweep this weekend, but you at a minimum have to win the series before you go on the road to South Carolina. Um, we will see what happens there. Looking around the league, the other night on the episode, I mentioned some big midweek matchups that were kind of flying under the radar. We had Jacksonville State, who is leading the Conference USA with a 12-0 record on the road at Auburn. And I mentioned that that's a game to pay attention to. And Jacksonville State run ruled Auburn on their own field in the midweek there. Another game I highlighted for you was the Texas State and Texas A&M game. Texas A&M on the road at Texas State. I mentioned Texas State as a dark horse team that a lot of people are mentioning for Omaha, and Texas State actually wins that ball game 9-8. We had another big game with Florida and Florida State, and Florida pulls out the win by 1 run, sweeping the season, I believe, for the 8th year over Florida State there. So big win for the Gators coming off of a series loss against Ole Miss. And then one game that I don't think anybody expected, but I highlighted it for you right here on this podcast. Bethune-Cookman, 10-2 record in the SWAC, goes to Alex Box Stadium in Baton Rouge and takes down the LSU Tigers 10-7. Not only did they take them down 10-7, that's on the back of them making 3 errors to LSU's 2. So it's not like they played a clean game, and they still got the win versus the LSU Tigers, who will inevitably drop out of the top 25 at this point. No idea what's going on in Baton Rouge, but now you've lost to McNeese State. I mean, you have lost to just some abysmal teams. If you're an LSU Tiger fan, I mean, you've got losses to McNeese, Northeastern, Louisiana Lafayette. You lose the series to Sacramento State. You lose the series to Vanderbilt. You lose the series to Oklahoma. You do get the series win versus Kentucky, and you get the series win versus Tennessee this weekend. And coming off of a big series win on the road in Knoxville, you turn around and you lose to Bethune-Cookman in your own stadium. So LSU fans cannot be happy. And honestly, I feel you, LSU fans. This is what Mississippi State felt like in 2022, right here. You won the championship last year. You're going into next season. You feel great about the season, and all of a sudden you just get punched and punched over and over and over again. And you're going, well, what the heck? What can we do? Mississippi State was there. I promise you, we felt it and we remember. This weekend, LSU goes to Oxford, and that's going to be a huge series as well. So something to watch there for the LSU Tigers. Mississippi State, what can they do against the Tennessee Volunteers this weekend? Can they get back in the saddle? Can they sweep and erase what Georgia did last weekend? We will find out, and we will break it down for you after the weekend. Thank you for tuning in. Like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, interact with us, comment, let me know your thoughts. What do you think Mississippi State's going to do this weekend? Is this a must win series, in your opinion, for Mississippi State to stay in the SEC and national seed race? Let us know. Thank you for joining the Neighborhood Bulldog tonight. Hail State.